There is a war that has been waging since the beginning of time, a cosmic battle between light and darkness, freedom and bondage, life and death. It is a war revealed in the Exodus, a war that split the Red Sea, and it is a war that will reach its final climax in the book of Revelation. The Passover was not merely a feast, it was a battlefield, and you today are part of that same ancient conflict. Night of the first Passover, the children of Israel stood at the brink of deliverance. Slavery had been their reality. Chains had bound their dreams, and the whip had scarred their hopes. But in one night, by the blood of the Lamb and the mighty hand of God, they were set free. Yet freedom did not mean the battle was over. No, it had just begun. Pharaoh changed his mind. He pursued them with chariots of iron and rage in his heart. And the people of God found themselves trapped, the Red Sea before them, the armies of Egypt behind them. How many times in your life have you felt trapped? How many times has it seemed that your deliverance would be your destruction? But listen closely. The same God who led Israel into the impossible is the God who made a way where there was no way. The Red Sea did not part before they moved. It parted as they move forward in faith. The miracle was born in motion. The sea obeyed the steps of the righteous. This is the pattern of the Passover war. God sets you free, but then comes the test. Then comes the pursuit. Then comes the moment where everything in you says, turn back. But the Spirit of God says, go forward. The greatest breakthroughs happen at the greatest points of resistance. The Red Sea was not an obstacle. It was the womb of Israel's destiny. Out of those waters, a nation was born. The Passover was never intended to be viewed as a simple historical event, locked away in the annals of ancient Israel's journey. It was the opening salvo of a great spiritual war, a revelation of divine dynamics that still unfold in the lives of those who follow God today. The deliverance from Egypt was not the conclusion of the story. It was the beginning of a battlefield walk. Freedom was given, but battles would immediately follow. The people of Israel were set free from bondage, but they were not free from the struggles of life. Instead, their liberation ushered them straight into confrontation, wilderness challenges, and fierce testing. Every believer must recognize this. The moment of deliverance is the moment the enemy declares war anew. Deliverance brings opposition. Victory invites conflict. Whenever God sets someone free, the enemy rises to steal, kill, and destroy what has been given. Passover teaches that salvation is the opening of a new war, not the end of struggle. It is the crossing of the threshold into a new realm where battles must be fought, but not with fear. Faith becomes the weapon, obedience becomes the strategy, and perseverance becomes the armor. When the Israelites stood on the shores of the Red Sea with Pharaoh's armies behind them, they were not standing at the end of a journey, but at the beginning of their true identity as a people of God. They had been slaves. They had been broken. But now they were being forged into warriors, and their backs were to the sea. Their enemies bore down on them with rage, and their hopes seemed crushed by the sound of thundering hooves. But it was in that desperate moment that the fullness of God's power was revealed. God did not call them out of Egypt to abandon them. He called them out to make them victorious in Him. In the life of every believer, there comes a Red Sea moment, a moment when everything looks impossible, when fear screams louder than faith, when every natural avenue is closed off. It is in that moment that faith must rise. It is in that moment that the call is not to retreat, but to stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Passover was the act of being purchased by the blood, but the Red Sea was the act of being separated from the past forever. There is no true deliverance without separation. Deliverance without a crossing is incomplete. The spiritual war ignited at Passover is not waged by human strength. It is fought through trust in the one who parts seas, crumbles walls, and defeats enemies without sword or spear. God shows His power most magnificently not in the absence of battles, but in the presence of them. Every trial, every challenge after deliverance is not proof of abandonment, but proof of calling. Those who have been set free are called to fight, not with flesh and blood, but with spiritual weapons mighty to the tearing down of strongholds. The Red Sea moment is God's training ground for his people. It is there that courage is born, where the old identity of slavery is drowned under the waves, and a new identity as children of the Most High arises on the far shore. Pharaoh's army was destroyed not by the strength of Israel, but by the hand of God responding to their obedience. They moved forward at the word of the Lord, even though all logic said retreat. They moved forward even though the path looked like death. Faith made the impossible possible. Trust turned terror into triumph. Today, this same war continues. Every soul delivered from bondage must understand that their new life is not a life free from battles, but a life filled with battles fought from victory. The Lamb has overcome, but we are called to walk out that overcoming through each Red Sea, through each desert trial, through every promised land that must be taken. The Red Sea is not a story of fear, but a story of faith that moves mountains, splits seas, and ushers the children of God into a destiny prepared from the foundation of the world. Passover was a door. The Red Sea was the path. Deliverance was given. Now deliverance must be lived out in battle. The war that began then continues now, and those who walk in the Spirit are called to fight the good fight, to run the race with perseverance, to move forward through every impossible barrier, knowing that their God is the one who makes a way. The journey from Egypt to the Promised Land was not simply a physical movement. It was a transformation of identity. When Israel walked out of Egypt, they were not yet a free people in heart and mind. They had lived for generations under the heavy yoke of slavery. Chains were not just on their wrists, but around their souls. God was not just freeing them from Pharaoh's grip, he was freeing them from the mindset of bondage. Every step they took through the wilderness was a step away from who they were, and a step toward who they were called to be. The Passover was a miracle, but it was only the beginning. Deliverance demanded more than an event. It demanded a transformation of the inner life. The same is true for every believer today. When a person comes to salvation, their past does not simply disappear. The habits, the fears, the patterns of thinking that were forged in captivity must now be undone and replaced with the mind of Messiah. The old self must be put to death, and a new creation must be raised up. This is not a painless process. Israel cried out for Egypt even after miracles surrounded them. They longed for the food of bondage rather than face the uncertainties of freedom. Many today still cling to the familiarity of their chains because the wilderness seems frightening. But God's plan is never to leave us in the place of partial deliverance. His purpose is full transformation, the creation of a people who are no longer slaves, but sons and daughters of the living God. The desert became Israel's school of identity. Every test they faced, every lack they experienced, every challenge that arose was meant to strip away the remnants of Egypt still clinging to their souls. When they hungered, God fed them with manna. When they thirsted, he brought forth water from the rock. Every provision was a message. You are no longer dependent on Egypt. You are dependent on me. Trust was the lesson. And trust had to be learned. Freedom is not simply walking out of chains. It is learning to walk by faith and not by sight. The wilderness was necessary because identity does not change in a moment. It is forged over time through trial and testing. God was shaping a people who would be able to receive the promised land without turning it into another Egypt. He was teaching them to walk in obedience, to rely on his voice, to live not by what they saw, but by what he had spoken. In the same way, every believer must go through their wilderness. After deliverance comes discipline. After salvation comes sanctification. God is not content to leave his people half-formed. Red Sea was the severing of the past, but the wilderness was the building of the future. Israel had to learn who they were apart from their old life. They were no longer slaves. They were a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. But it took trial to reveal this truth. They had to see that their old ways of fear, murmuring, and rebellion had no place in the life God had prepared for them. Freedom demanded new hearts and new minds. Deliverance is both a gift and a call to transformation. It is an act of God's mercy, but also an invitation to walk in a new way. The same truth resounds today. Those who are set free by the blood of the Lamb are called to walk a different road. They are called out of the world, but must also have the world called out of them. The wilderness seasons of life, the dry times, the challenging moments are not signs of abandonment, but signs of God's active work. He is shaping, molding, preparing his people for something greater. He is removing the old so he can bring forth the new. He is proving that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Freedom is a responsibility as much as it is a gift. It requires leaving behind not just physical chains, but emotional, mental, and spiritual ones. The temptation to return to Egypt will always exist when the road grows hard. But the promise of God is not found in going back. It is found in pressing forward, trusting that he who called is faithful. Israel's journey is the blueprint for every believer's life. Salvation is the beginning, but the wilderness is the place where character is forged, where trust is proven, and where the identity of a child of God is fully realized. The journey from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai was not just a movement across a desert, but a transformation of identity. The children of Israel were no longer slaves, but were being molded into a nation set apart for God's purposes. This journey was filled with trials, hunger, thirst, and moments of desperation. Yet each trial was used by God to strip away the slave mentality and to teach them to depend entirely on him. In the same way, when God delivers us from bondage, he doesn't simply transport us instantly into the promised land. There is a wilderness season, a time of testing and refining where God teaches us how to live in freedom, how to walk by faith, and how to depend fully on him for every need. The wilderness is not a punishment, it is a preparation. It is the place where God removes the old ways of thinking, heals the wounds of the past, and builds within us the character required to sustain the blessings he is leading us into. The wilderness journey reveals that freedom is not simply the absence of bondage, it is the presence of God. The Israelites discovered that true life was not found in the abundance of material things, but in the daily provision and presence of the Almighty. Manna fell from heaven to feed them. Water flowed from the rock to quench their thirst. And a cloud and fire guided their every step. These miracles were not just about survival, they were about relation. God was teaching them, and he teaches us, that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. In our own lives, when we find ourselves walking through barren seasons, God is inviting us to discover the richness of his presence. He allows certain things to be stripped away so that we might find our fullness in him alone. Mount Sinai represents a pivotal moment where God revealed himself not merely as a deliverer, but as a covenant partner. At Sinai, the law was given, the covenant was established, and the people were called to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The encounter at Sinai teaches us that salvation is not an end, but a beginning. Being saved from Egypt was only the first step. Entering into covenant relationship with God was the ultimate purpose. In the same way, when God delivers us, he is not just saving us from something, but calling us into something far greater, into relationship, into purpose, into destiny. Sinai reminds us that with freedom comes responsibility. We are called not just to live for ourselves, but to live as his witnesses, his ambassadors, his holy people set apart in a world that often forgets him. But the journey from the Red Sea to Sinai also teaches that while God leads, the journey is not always easy. There were complaints, rebellions, and moments of despair among the people. God's leading did not exempt them from hardship, but through every challenge, he revealed more of himself. Every trial was an invitation to trust deeper, to see his faithfulness, to experience his provision. Often in life, we expect that following God will make things easy, but Scripture shows the opposite. The wilderness also highlights the necessity of obedience. Many Israelites failed to reach the promised land, not because of external enemies, but because of internal unbelief and disobedience. The same danger exists for us. Deliverance is a gift, but entering into the fullness of God's promises requires trust, obedience, and perseverance. It requires listening to his voice even when it is hard, following his lead even when it doesn't make sense, and believing his promises even when the evidence seems contrary. The entire journey is a mirror for our lives. We are all on a pilgrimage between deliverance and promise, between salvation and fulfillment. Along the way, we will encounter Red Seas, wildernesses, mountains of revelation, and valleys of testing. Each season is vital. Each challenge has a purpose. God is not merely concerned with getting us to the destination. He is deeply invested in who we become along the way. During the Red Sea was about breaking the chains, but Sinai was about forging a new identity. The War of Passover did not end at the Red Sea, and it did not conclude with the giving of the law at Sinai. It continues through the ages, finding its echoes in every generation and in every life that seeks to walk with God. The battle that began with Pharaoh's hardened heart continues as the forces of darkness war against the purposes of God. From Egypt to Babylon, from Rome to the present day, the struggle remains the same, a battle between the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light. Revelation unveils this ancient war in its final stages, showing us that what began in the Exodus will reach its ultimate fulfillment in the final deliverance of God's people. The enemy who sought to destroy Israel and Egypt is the same enemy who seeks to oppose the children of God today. But just as the power of Egypt was broken, so too will every force of darkness be defeated by the power of the Lamb. The war of Passover is ultimately the war of redemption. It is the battle to free the captives, to break the chains of sin, to overthrow the reign of death, and to usher in the kingdom of life. The Lamb who was slain at Passover is the same Lamb who appears victorious in Revelation. He is the Lamb who overcomes, the Lamb who leads his people through the wilderness of this world, and the Lamb who will stand in victory on Mount Zion. The message of Passover is not just about escape. It is about triumph. It is about moving from slavery to freedom, from death to life, from bondage to promise. Red Sea was not just a miraculous event for the Israelites. It was a foreshadowing of what God would accomplish through Messiah for all humanity. The waters that parted for Israel represent the pathway that God makes for all who believe. Just as the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground while the enemy was swallowed up behind them, so too do believers pass from death to life, from judgment to mercy, to the work of the cross. The cross is the greater Red Sea, the place where God makes a way where there was no way, the place where sin and death are defeated. But the war of Passover requires perseverance. Just as Pharaoh hardened his heart and pursued the Israelites even after their initial deliverance, so too does the enemy pursue those who have been set free. Freedom is not the absence of opposition. It is the power to stand in the face of opposition and prevail. The Israelites had to trust God to lead them through the sea and then through the wilderness. We had to learn to fight battles, to resist the temptation to return to Egypt, and to keep their eyes on the promises of God. In the same way, believers today must recognize that the Christian life is not a one-time event, but a journey of faithfulness. We are called to endure, to hold fast, to resist the lies of the enemy, and to walk in the truth of our deliverance. The war of Passover is also a call to worship. In Exodus, Moses told Pharaoh that the Israelites must be set free so that they could worship God in the wilderness. Freedom is not an end in itself. It is for the purpose of knowing, loving, and worshiping God. Revelation echoes this theme as the redeemed sing new songs before the throne. True victory is not merely escape from bondage, but entrance into the presence of God. Living lives of worship, holiness, and obedience. Worship is warfare. It is the declaration that God is greater than Pharaoh, greater than Babylon, greater than any force of darkness that seeks to enslave. Every time we lift our voices in praise, we join the eternal song of victory that began at the Red Sea and will crescendo at the marriage supper of the Lamb. Finally, the war of Passover reminds us that victory is already secured. The Lamb has already been slain. The enemy's defeat is already sealed. Our role is not to win the war, but to walk in the victory that has already been won. Just as the Israelites did not have to fight Pharaoh at the Red Sea, but simply had to trust and move forward in obedience, so too must we trust in the finished work of Messiah and move forward in faith. Revelation calls believers to overcome, not by their own strength, but by standing firm in the victory of the Lamb. Every believer is called not merely to endure the battles of life, but to walk forward in boldness, carrying the banner of God's overcoming power wherever they go. The journey from the Red Sea to Revelation is not a passive story, but an active summons. You are an agent in this cosmic conflict. When Israel stepped onto the dry seabed, they did more than escape Egypt. They declared war on oppression, demonstrating that any force arrayed against God's people is subject to his authority in your life. Every obstacle you face, every Red Sea moment is an invitation to step into your calling as a warrior of faith. It is a call to refuse to be shaped by fear, to refuse to yield to past failures, and to press forward with unwavering confidence in the one who parts seas. To live as a testimony of God's overcoming power means to recognize that your victories are not measured by the absence of trials, but by the presence of his strength in the midst of them. It means that when circumstances scream defeat, you speak life. When darkness threatens, you shine light. When the enemy pursues, you stand firm, because your allegiance is to the King who has already triumphed. The world may grow darker, the storms more violent, but the war belongs to the Lord. This is your call to boldness, to move through every Red Sea with your eyes fixed on the promise, to embrace the wilderness seasons as preparation for greater miracles, to worship in the face of opposition, and to proclaim the victory of the cross in every corner of your world. You are not merely an observer of the Passover War. You are a participant. You are a carrier of the same Spirit who cracked open the seas, who toppled the strongholds of sin, who will one day shake heaven and earth in the final battle of Revelation. So step forward. Take your place in the march of redemption.